The plane ticket trembled under my fingers before I even read Evelyn Hart's name. I had seen blood contracts signed on ivory paper without flinching. I had watched men lie with a gun against their teeth and still kept my pulse steady. But that cheap white boarding pass on her desk, half hidden beneath a blue file and a legal pad filled with my schedule, did something no threat in 15 years had managed to do. It made my hand stop. Departure, tomorrow morning. One way. For 3 full seconds, I just stared at it. The office around me remained as precise as she always kept it. Pins aligned, folders stacked, my calls color-coded in her neat handwriting. The coffee she had set down for me exactly 7 minutes earlier, now giving off a thin ribbon of steam. Nothing in that room looked like panic. Nothing looked like betrayal. And yet betrayal was the first word my world had trained me to reach for. I turned the ticket over. No note. No explanation. No mistake. Evelyn Hart was leaving the country tomorrow. I should have put it back and waited. That would have been the disciplined move. Let surveillance confirm the route. Let my security team pull airport footage, bank transfers, burner phones, passport scans. In my world, patience was often sharper than violence. But patience belonged to the version of me that still believed she was only an employee. I lifted my head and looked through the glass wall into the outer office. Her chair was empty. Her coat was gone. The digital clock on the far wall clicked over to 8:17 p.m., and for the first time in years, I realized I did not know where my own secretary was after hours. That ignorance landed harder than the ticket. Because Evelyn Hart knew everything that mattered. She controlled my calendar, filtered my calls, memorized names I never had to repeat, and could tell from the sound of my footsteps whether I was angry, injured, or simply tired. She had stood 3 feet from conversations that could ruin senators and bury rivals. She knew which warehouses mattered, which meetings were fake, which names were never to be spoken near a phone. And she had bought a one-way ticket. If you've ever felt the exact second trust starts cracking, you know it makes no sound at all. I walked out of my office with the ticket still in my hand. The hallway lights threw long white bars across the marble floor, and every man stationed outside straightened when they saw my face. No one spoke. No one needed to. I rarely carried paper unless it meant money, death, or both. Where is Evelyn Hart? I asked. Silence first. Then Luca from security swallowed and answered. She left 20 minutes ago. Left. Not went home. Not stepped out. Left. Alone. As far as we saw, yes. As far as we saw. Sloppy. Dangerous. Unacceptable. But underneath the anger rising in me was something colder and harder to name. Evelyn had never once missed a briefing, never misplaced a file, never asked for anything beyond the boundaries of her job. She worked like someone building an escape hatch in secret, quietly, carefully, one invisible piece at a time. And I had never noticed. That was the part that unsettled me most. I looked down again at the boarding pass. New York to London. Seat 14A. 1 check bag. Tomorrow at 9:40 a.m. A clean exit. Planned, not impulsive. Whatever this was, it had been moving beneath my roof while I was busy believing control meant awareness. It didn't. I slipped the ticket into my inside jacket pocket. Not because I wanted proof. Because I wanted the right to ask her myself. Pull building footage from the last 72 hours, I said. Every entrance, every garage camera, every delivery bay. Freeze airport contacts until I say otherwise. No one touches her, no one scares her, and no one warns her I know. That changed the room. Men who had expected rage heard restraint instead, and restraint from me was always more dangerous. They moved instantly. The monitors washed my office in cold blue light, turning glass into ice and my hands into something carved from stone. I stood behind my desk and watched Evelyn Hart move through the lobby footage from 8:14 that morning, one hand wrapped around a coffee she never drank, the other gripping the strap of her bag like it was the only steady thing left in her life. She paused at the security desk, smiled at a guard who never looked up, and stepped into the elevator with the kind of calm people mistake for peace. I knew better. Calm like that usually meant a decision had already been paid for in private. I told myself I was looking for who pushed her to buy that ticket. What I found first was something worse. At 11:52 the night before, she came back into the building alone. No driver. No escort. No one from my organization at her shoulder. She crossed the marble lobby in the same gray coat she wore on long days, but her pace was wrong. Too measured. Too careful. The camera by the elevator caught her turning slightly, and I saw it. The faint stiffness in her left side. The way she protected her ribs with her arm. I leaned closer. Stop there. The frame froze on her face. Even through grainy security footage, I could see she had been crying. The room went silent behind me, but the silence inside me was louder. I had spent years learning how to hear danger before it reached my door, and somehow it had been sitting 20 feet from my office, answering my calls, arranging my meetings, hiding bruises beneath silk and discipline. The ticket on her desk had looked like betrayal when I first saw it. Now it looked like a wound with a date on it. I motioned for the footage to continue. She stepped off the elevator on my floor, disappeared into the hallway, and reappeared 17 minutes later. In that gap, no camera reached her desk. When she returned, she was holding a file against her chest. Not one of mine. Too thin. Too personal. She stood beside her desk for a long moment, staring down at something I couldn't see, then sat and pressed both palms flat against the wood as if she needed to borrow strength from it. Then the next camera angle answered the question. She opened the top drawer. Inside was a white envelope, already addressed. She touched it, not like office paper, but like a goodbye. I felt my jaw lock. I had men who feared disappointing me. I had enemies who feared my temper. But in that moment, all I could think was that Evelyn Hart had prepared to vanish from my life with the same quiet care she used to organize my war. No drama. No accusation. Just a clean exit before dawn could stop her. If you've ever watched someone leave long before they walk out the door, then you know the kind of violence silence can do. I ordered the feed advanced to the garage. At 12:21 a.m. black sedan rolled in without registering at the gate. That got everyone in the room moving. Not because the car was unfamiliar, but because it should have been logged, cleared, accounted for. Instead it slipped into my building like a lie someone thought I would never check. Evelyn Hart appeared in the frame 2 minutes later, exiting the side stairwell. She did not approach the car. She stopped 10 feet away. Good. Then the rear door opened. A man stepped out, face obscured by the camera angle, but I recognized the posture at once. Someone who believed threat was more efficient than persuasion. He handed her something. She refused it. He moved closer. She took one step back. He said something short. Her shoulders tightened. Then she accepted the item with a hand that trembled once before going still. I didn't need audio to know coercion when I saw it. Zoom. The image sharpened just enough for me to see the object in her hand. A photograph. Not money. Not a passport. A photograph. My pulse slowed in the dangerous way it always did before I made a decision that could not be taken back. She looked down at the picture, and whatever color remained in her face drained away. That was why she was leaving. Not greed. Not disloyalty. Fear aimed with precision. I straightened. Traced that car. Now. No one hesitated. I picked up Evelyn Hart's plane ticket from my desk and looked at tomorrow's departure time again. Less than 24 hours. Whoever wanted her gone had not bribed her. They had cornered her. And whoever thought they could use my secretary as leverage had made one fatal mistake. They had forced me to choose publicly. I slid the ticket into my coat pocket and headed for the door. I was done watching her pain through security glass. Before this day was over, I was going to ask Evelyn Hart why she was running. And I was going to find out who had given her a reason. The elevator rose without a sound, but the pressure inside it felt like a sealed chamber filling with smoke. Stainless steel walls threw back my reflection in fractured strips. Dark coat. Colder eyes. One hand still pressed over the plane ticket in my pocket, as if paper alone could confirm what instinct already had. By the time the doors opened onto the executive floor, the building had gone strangely quiet. Phones still rang in distant offices. Heels still crossed marble. But the silence around Evelyn Hart's desk felt arranged, like fear had stepped back to make room for something worse. Her monitor was on. Her chair was empty. A slim folder lay open beside her keyboard, neat as ever, except for one line typed and left unfinished on the screen. I need to. The rest was blank. I heard the copy room door close behind me. The sound was soft. It landed like a gun being cocked. I turned and found Evelyn Hart standing there with a stack of files against her chest, frozen so completely that even her breath seemed to stop halfway. The fluorescent light above the copy room washed the color from her face. She looked at me, then at my hand, then down at the coat pocket where the edge of the ticket must have printed faintly through the fabric. Her voice came out thin. You saw it. For a moment, I said nothing. That was deliberate. Panic often rushed in to fill silence, and panic told the truth faster than loyalty ever did. I watched her fingers tighten on the files until the paper bent. She wasn't angry. She wasn't ashamed. She was bracing. Yes, I said. Tomorrow night. One way. The folder slipped from her hands and hit the carpet with a muffled thud, contracts spilling at our feet. She didn't bend to pick them up. Her shoulders lifted once with a breath that looked painful, and then she did the one thing I had not expected. She stepped in front of the elevator, blocking it, not to keep me from leaving, to keep anyone else from getting out. Don't call anyone, she said. Not from your security team. Not from the drivers. No one from the organization. That changed the air between us. Until that second, resignation had still been possible. Fear, even blackmail, could explain a woman trying to disappear. But people only warned me away from my own men when the rot was already closer than the walls. I took one step toward her. She did not move. Who are you hiding from? Her eyes flashed, not with defiance, but with calculation, as if she were measuring whether truth would save me or condemn us both. Through the glass wall beside us, downtown light spilled gray across the floor. It caught the slight tremor in her left hand. I noticed then what I had missed on camera. A bruise. Faint yellow at the wrist. Fresh red above it. Finger shaped beneath her sleeve. Something inside me went still. Evelyn Hart, I said, quieter now. Who put their hands on you? Her lips parted, but no answer came. She looked past me toward the corridor, toward the rows of offices where my people worked under my name, under my protection, under the illusion that I saw everything. Then she looked back at me, and when she finally spoke, the words were stripped bare. This isn't about quitting. I already knew that. It's about surviving long enough to leave. The room seemed to contract around that sentence. Every machine hum sharpened. Every overhead light turned harsh. I reached for the folder at our feet and saw what had spilled from between the contracts. A printed photo, folded once across the middle. I picked it up before she could stop me. A little brick house. White trim. Small porch. Two figures caught in long lens grain near the mailbox. Evelyn Hart. And an older woman beside her. I looked up. You have family. The air inside that hallway seemed to lose oxygen. For one beat, Evelyn Hart did not move. The fluorescent lights above us buzzed faintly, turning her skin pale and the photo in my hand almost surgical in its clarity. I had spent years building an empire by learning what people hid in the half-second before they answered. Fear, greed, lies. But what crossed her face was worse than any of them. It was calculation born from exhaustion. Not the look of someone caught cheating me. The look of someone deciding which truth would do the least damage. I held up the photograph between two fingers. You told me there was no one who could be reached through you. That was true inside this building. Her voice came out low, controlled, but I saw the pulse jump in her throat. Not outside it. A weaker person would have begged then. Evelyn Hart straightened instead, one hand tightening around the edge of the dropped folder until her knuckles blanched white. Come with me, I said. No. The refusal stopped me more effectively than if she had slapped me. Around us, the elevator doors remained open like a metal jaw, waiting. Men in my world survived by forcing compliance. Secretaries in my world survived by reading the weather and stepping aside before thunder hit. Evelyn Hart did neither. She bent, gathered the contracts from the floor, took the photo from my hand with a speed that told me she had protected it before, and looked directly at me. If you want to test whether I've betrayed you, she said, do it here. Ask whatever you were already going to ask. But I'm not getting in that elevator with you. Steel entered her voice at the exact moment I expected it to crack. That alone told me this had nothing to do with theft and everything to do with survival. So I changed the game. I took the folder from her arms, flipped it open, and slid out the stack she had prepared for the Zurich transfer. Bank instructions, shell signatures, offshore routing notes. The kind of paper trail that could burn cities if it ever reached the wrong prosecutor. I let the pages fan in my hand. If I call downstairs right now, I said, every account tied to my Eastern Corridor freezes in 10 minutes. Every shipment scheduled tonight stalls. Every captain starts asking why my secretary was preparing to disappear with the numbers. I stepped closer. Tell me why I shouldn't make that call. Silence sat between us, hard and bright. Then Evelyn Hart did something I had not anticipated. She reached into her purse slowly, as if handling an explosive, and pulled out a sealed white envelope. No tremor, no plea, just a decision. Because if you do, she said, this gets opened by someone who is not loyal to you. My hand stopped over my phone. The envelope had no address on the front, just my name in her handwriting. I looked at her. What is it? Insurance. For you. For both of us. The hallway seemed to narrow. I took the envelope, broke the seal, and unfolded the contents. The first page was a medical bill from a private oncology center in Baltimore. The patient name was blacked out with a thick marker, but not well enough to hide the date. Weekly treatments. Expensive ones. The second page was a surveillance still pulled from a traffic camera. A black SUV parked across from the same little brick house in the photo. The third page made my jaw lock. It was a ledger copy. Not one of mine. Not one my organization should have known existed. A shadow record listing cash movements, coded names, and a series of payments marked against one line over and over again. Hart. I looked up slowly. They found her 6 weeks ago, Evelyn Hart said. The older woman in that picture raised me after my mother died. She is all I have. Someone started paying her rent in cash, then started paying her doctors. The rest of her sentence stayed between us like smoke, unfinished and poisonous. Payments for rent. Payments for doctors. Enough money to keep an old woman alive, and enough fear to make a capable woman buy a ticket out of the country without telling the man who signed every transfer inside this building. The fluorescent lights above us hummed with a sick white glare, turning Evelyn Hart's face pale as paper. She was not trembling now. That was what disturbed me. Panic could be managed. Calm meant she had already measured the cost, and decided running was cheaper than trusting me. Who knows? I asked. Her eyes held mine for one hard second. I never told anyone about her. That answer narrowed the world. I stepped away from the desk, already reaching for the encrypted phone inside my coat. Steel, glass, silence. Everything around us belonged to my organization, and for the first time that night, I felt the weight of that truth as something filthy. If someone had found the woman who raised Evelyn Hart, if someone had built a private ledger around her, then the leak was not outside my walls. It was breathing my air. Give me every date you remember, I said. Rent, doctors, deliveries, strange calls, anything. Evelyn Hart moved then, fast and precise, pulling a legal pad toward her. No tears, no wasted motion. She wrote down 6 weeks of quiet extortion from memory while I made 3 calls that changed the temperature of the city. On the first call, I froze all outgoing cash routes that had bypassed my primary books. On the second, I ordered every courier channel tied to medical payments and rental drops to be tracked back within the hour. On the third, I shut the airport watch list around Evelyn Hart's departure without canceling the ticket. A cage, not an escape. If they were watching her, I wanted them to think tomorrow was still on. Sit, I told her. She did not. Not until you tell me whether leaving will get her killed. The question landed clean. Smarter than fear. Smarter than obedience. For a brief moment, in that hard white hallway, she was not my secretary, and I was not the man whose empire had wrapped itself around both our throats. We were 2 people standing over the same blade, trying to see who was holding it. I don't know, I said. Truth made her flinch more than a lie would have. Minutes later, reports began to come in. Numbers first. Location second. A South End pharmacy. A landlord in Queens taking cash through an intermediary. A driver using one of my shell security firms to move envelopes on nights no official jobs had been logged. Layer by layer, the hidden channel revealed itself. Not random, not sloppy, not external. Internal. Protected. Comment below if you've ever seen silence become more dangerous than a gun. I took the legal pad from Evelyn Hart and compared her dates against the first set of trace transfers coming through my phone. They matched too neatly. Someone had not merely discovered her weakness. Someone had systematized it, budgeted it, maintained it over time. This was not intimidation. This was management. Cold anger settled into my bones. The kind that didn't shout. The kind that sharpened. I sent one more order and had my internal finance archive opened against all site-authorized disbursements over the last 2 months. Names, codes, signatures, access paths. My private network turned inward like a blade folding back on the hand that threw it. Men who had spent years hunting my enemies were now auditing my own bloodstream. Every hidden route lit up under pressure. Then one signature pattern surfaced. Not a name. Worse, a clearance chain. Only a handful of people in my world could authorize shadow movements through medical fronts and housing buffers without tripping alarms. Fewer still could access personal personnel files deeply enough to learn that Evelyn Hart had an older woman hidden off every formal record. Cold air from the vents skimmed the back of my neck while the monitor threw pale light across the office wall, turning every reflection into a threat. I ran the clearance chain again, slower this time, tracing the approvals through shell housing accounts, medical reimbursements, and a charity transport corridor I had not used in 18 months. It ended where I had hoped it would not end. Inside my own structure, high enough to move quietly, close enough to smell my habits, and intimate enough to know that Evelyn Hart would break before she begged. I did not call security. That was the first choice. The second came 30 seconds later, when the private elevator opened and Evelyn Hart stepped into the doorway holding a folder against her chest like it could stop a bullet. Her eyes went first to the screen, then to my face, and whatever small reserve of safety she had left inside herself thinned to almost nothing. You found it. Not the ticket. Not the desk. The chain. I stood, slow enough not to make her flinch, though I saw the instinct pass through her shoulders anyway. Someone inside my organization is funding your aunt's life. She swallowed once. Then I was right to leave. That landed harder than accusation. Not because she had planned to go, but because she had understood the danger before I had allowed myself to. For one sharp second, preserving the empire was the cleaner answer. Cut the vulnerable point loose. Let her disappear if she could. Seal the breach. Hunt the traitor without witnesses, without noise, without weakness attached to my name. Then my phone vibrated across the desk. A secure internal line. One of only 3. I answered without taking my eyes off her. A male voice, filtered but calm, came through the speaker. The old woman's transfer has been rerouted. If Evelyn Hart is still in your building, she has 1 hour before that hospital room becomes a crime scene. Silence followed, deliberate and confident. Then the line went dead. The room seemed to contract around the last word. I saw Evelyn Hart's hand lose its grip on the folder. Papers slipped loose, white against the dark floor, and among them was a photocopy of a medication list with her aunt's name blacked out in thick marker. Hidden, protected, erased. Someone had found her anyway. I moved first, but not toward a weapon. I crossed to her, picked up the papers, and put them back into her shaking hands. Look at me. She did. For the next 10 minutes, you do exactly what I say. A breath caught in her throat. Why would I trust you now? Because I had accused her. Because I had watched that ticket like evidence instead of a warning flare. Because every ounce of power I carried had taught people like her that men like me protect systems before souls. I opened the encrypted channel tied to my executive council, the deepest layer of the empire, and triggered a full-room summons. No private purge. No hidden interrogation. If the rot sat close to me, I would cut it out in daylight. When the council chamber filled, polished stone and smoked glass reflecting cold light over 6 silent chairs, I brought Evelyn Hart in beside me. That was the dangerous choice made visible. Men who had killed on my order looked up and saw the woman I had once treated like a breach standing at my right hand, inside the one room where she should never have been allowed. Murmurs rose, then stopped when I placed the clearance file on the table. Whoever touched these channels touched me. I said, whoever used a sick woman to force movement from my secretary is no longer under my protection. One chair shifted. A cufflink flashed. Tiny, almost elegant. I knew that pattern. I had seen that hand sign off on emergency ports, armored shipments, and burial funds. The cuff link caught the chandelier light again, a cold silver blink in a room built to intimidate. I did not look at the man wearing it right away. Men like that survived by reading the direction of fear, and I had no intention of giving him mine. Around the table, my organization sat in a silence so complete I could hear the old radiator click behind the paneled wall. Evelyn Hart stood 3 steps from the door with the color drained from her face, but her spine was straight, and that steadiness told me 2 things at once. She knew she had been found out, and she knew something worse was still moving. Lock this floor, I said. Chairs scraped back. Phones came out. The order had barely landed when Evelyn Hart turned toward me, not toward the exit. Don't seal the lobby, she said. That's where they want everyone looking. The room shifted at that. Not because she had spoken, but because she had cut across my command in front of men who had watched me rule by precision for years. I should have corrected her. I should have made an example out of interruption. Instead, I saw the flick of her eyes toward the West Service elevator, and every piece I had been holding separately slid together hard enough to hurt. The hidden transport channels, the forged medical reimbursement trail, the older woman scrubbed off formal record, the plane ticket, not an escape for herself, a diversion. Then the fire alarm screamed. Red strobes washed the conference room in violent pulses. Somewhere below us, feet started running, fast and blind, the way crowds always did when somebody manufactured panic. Smoke would have sent them outward. An alarm drove them downward and into choke points, into cameras, into prepared hands. "Stay behind me," I said. I was already moving, not toward the table, not toward the man with the cuff link, toward Evelyn Hart. We hit the hallway just as the first shot cracked from the far end, sharp and ugly against marble and glass. One of the wall sconces burst. Hot fragments sprayed across the carpet. Evelyn Hart did not scream. She grabbed my sleeve once, hard, then let go as I drew and fired low, forcing the shooter back behind the corner. Chaos erupted. Men shouted. Doors slammed. The alarm kept shrieking. This was no private betrayal anymore. That was the price being dragged out into the light. Whoever had arranged this had stopped trying to manipulate me quietly. They were willing to spill blood in my building, in front of staff, cameras, and half the downtown block that would hear the sirens. To protect Evelyn Hart, I would have to answer in full view of witnesses. Power like mine survived on control, on distance, on the illusion that I never had to bleed in public. I chose differently. Bring the cars to the front entrance. I barked into the nearest phone. No back route. No tunnel. Front. One of my men stared at me like he thought he had misheard. Front, he said. Now. Evelyn Hart caught the meaning before anyone else did. If we used the front entrance, everyone outside would see me escorting her myself. Rivals would see where my protection was placed. Police informants would see it. The people inside my own organization wondering whether she mattered would get their answer in one brutal image. Good. We took the stairs because elevators became coffins in moments like this. On the landing between 17 and 16, a body came through the door fast, weapon up. Evelyn Hart moved first. Not away. Forward. She slammed the metal fire extinguisher from its cradle into his wrist with both hands. Bone cracked. The gun skidded over the concrete. I put him down before he could breathe through the pain. For 1 second, under the red pulse of the alarm, she looked at the man on the floor with a grief so private it did not belong to fear. "You knew," I said as we descended. "Not who," she answered. The stairwell swallowed the alarm into a dull metallic pulse as we dropped level by level through red light and concrete dust. My shoulder had started to burn where the graze from upstairs had finally decided to announce itself. But pain was useful. It kept the mind from drifting into the wrong kind of memory. Evelyn Hart stayed 1 step ahead of me, one hand on the rail, the other shaking so slightly most men would have missed it. I did not miss things like that. Not anymore. At the service landing below the garage, she stopped beside a gray electrical cabinet and pressed her palm flat against the steel as if steadying the whole building. "Say it clearly," I told her. Her breath caught once. Then she turned, and in the emergency glow her face looked stripped down to something I had never allowed myself to study. Not fear, not guilt, grief with a deadline. "The ticket was never for escape," she said. "It was bait." The words hit harder than the gunfire had. I stared at her, waiting for the lie to blink. It did not. She reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and pulled out a folded packet I had never seen. Not office paper. Heavier stock, creased at the corners, sealed once and reopened. She put it in my hand without argument, which was how I knew the cost of it had already been paid in her mind. Inside were copies of internal transfer routes from my own organization, port schedules, shell account numbers, and a handwritten ledger key in the same narrow hand I had seen on the old authorization slip. At the bottom of the last page was tomorrow's date, the flight number from the ticket, and one line written in ink so dark it looked carved. Passenger manifests trigger release. For the first time that night, I felt the floor shift under everything I thought I controlled. They needed me to board, Evelyn Hart said. Not to leave. To confirm I was still useful, still frightened, still willing to run exactly when they expected. Once the manifest locked, the files would move through customs as diplomatic freight under the diversion. By the time anyone checked the plane, The ledger would be gone and the money with it. I looked up. Who built the release? My brother. The stairwell went silent except for the alarm. A dead man would have been simpler. A liar would have been easier to punish. But there was no performance in her now. Only exhaustion. He worked logistics 3 years ago, she said before I could speak. Low level. Invisible enough to survive. Smart enough to be noticed by the wrong people. When he realized what they were routing through the medical shipments, he copied records. He thought evidence would protect him. Her mouth tightened. It made him valuable. Then disposable. The private grief I had seen upstairs suddenly had a shape. He's dead. I don't know. That answer was worse than yes. I was told he would stay alive as long as I followed instructions. Type what I was told. Move what I was told. Wait. When they placed the ticket on my desk, it meant the countdown had started. Board the plane, trigger the release, keep quiet, and maybe I'd get proof he was breathing. Refuse, and they send me pieces of certainty instead. I read the pages again, slower this time, and understood the part that changed everything I thought I knew about her. She had not been planning to abandon the country. She had been staying inside my walls for months, maybe longer, feeding a trap with her own reputation, letting me believe cold things about her, because suspicion was safer than the truth. Every immaculate schedule, every corrected ledger, every late night at that desk had not been loyalty or ambition. It had been endurance under blackmail. And hidden inside that endurance was something even more dangerous. 3 account numbers on the second sheet were marked in red pencil. Mine were not. The elevator doors opened on the top floor, and I stepped out with the ticket in my coat pocket and the red-marked ledger page still burning through my thoughts. The office lights were low, the city behind the glass like a field of cold stars, and Evelyn Hart stood by my desk with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She looked calm, but I could see the strain in her eyes now, the kind that comes from carrying fear too long and calling it discipline. On my desk lay the second sheet, the one with 3 account numbers marked in red pencil. Mine were not. I said, who owns them? Evelyn swallowed once. The people holding my brother. The room seemed to lose its air. For a second, I did not move, because anger wanted to come first and judgment wanted to come second, but truth had arrived before both. She had not been planning to run from me. She had been buying time, moving money through my empire to keep killers from reaching her family. And the ticket had been her last desperate exit if I failed to notice. I had built a kingdom on fear, yet the real threat had been standing 10 feet from me, pretending to be only a secretary. I picked up the page, read the numbers again, and made the decision that could not be taken back. Call them, I said. Put it on speaker. Evelyn's breath caught. Dominic. Now. She did. The call connected with a single ring, and the man on the other end started to speak in a voice full of smug certainty. I let him finish one sentence. Then I turned the phone toward the window and gave the order that changed the night. My men were already moving through the building, sealing exits, tracing the shell companies, cutting off every transfer route tied to the 3 accounts. The Empire answered in silence first, then in motion. Within minutes, the money was frozen. The blackmail chain was broken, and the people behind it were suddenly the ones trapped. Evelyn stared at me as if she could not decide whether to fear me or believe me. Why help me now? She asked. I looked at the ticket, then at her. Because you were never leaving for yourself. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. She just stood there, rigid and exhausted, as if dignity was the last thing she still owned. I reached into my coat, took out the ticket, and placed it in her hand. Then I tore it in half. You are not boarding any plane tomorrow, I said. You are going home. My security is taking your brother out tonight, and no one will touch him again. She closed her fingers around the torn pieces. The room went still except for the city wind against the glass. For the first time, I understood that her silence had never been weakness. It had been sacrifice, and for the first time in my life, I used my power without poison in it. I turned toward the desk, pressed the intercom, and gave one final order that made the whole building listen. From this moment on, Evelyn Hart is under my protection. That was the promise behind the ticket. Not escape. Rescue.